Be me Saul, 30-something software architect, not a code ninja or a rock star developer, just a guy who's really, really good at building systems that don't break. For the better part of a decade, I've worked at a mid-sized, unglamorous tech company. We make a complex logistics platform for other businesses. It's the kind of software that makes the modern world function, but nobody ever thinks about it. It's my baby, in a way. I designed the core architecture from the ground up. Let's call it the engine. The engine is efficient, stable, and incredibly complex. It has its quirks, sure, like an old but reliable car, but I know every single one of them. I know which parts to grease, which to leave alone, and which will explode if you look at them funny. My life is pretty quiet. Work, go home, play some games, work on personal coding projects. I'm not antisocial, just focused. I believe in merit. You're either good at your job or you're not. Everything else is just noise. The team is, or was, the same way. A small group of old guard developers, guys who have been around, who speak in code and not in corporate buzzwords. We didn't have drama. We had problems, and we fixed them. Our meetings were short and to the point. It was a well-oiled machine, unsexy but profitable. Then, one day, the owner called an all-hands meeting. He was a decent guy, a businessman, not a tech guy. He cared about the bottom line and trusted us to handle the details. He stood at the front of the room, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. He announced we were getting a new head of development to modernize our workflow and foster a more dynamic culture. My internal red flag alarm started ringing softly. In walks Amalia. She had that specific look. The kind of person who has a pristine LinkedIn profile with a dozen endorsements for strategic leadership from people you've never heard of. She gave a big, bright smile and launched into a speech. It was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing. A verbal Jackson Pollock painting of buzzwords. Synergy, holistic approach, psychological safety, actionable insights, deconstructing legacy hierarchies. The owner was practically swooning. He saw progress. He saw the future. I saw a car crash in slow motion. The old guard guys were just staring, blank-faced, trying to parse what any of it meant. MFW. I realize my job is about to become 80% less about coding and 800% more about whatever this is. The first week was interesting. Amalia didn't try to understand the tech. She didn't ask about the engine, or our release cycle, or our technical debt. Instead, she scheduled one-on-one meetings with everyone to understand our feelings about the workplace. My turn came. I sat in a conference room with her. She had a brand new notepad and a pen that probably cost more than my keyboard. She asked me how I felt about the team's dynamic. I told her it was functional. We have a clear goal and we work towards it. She tilted her head, giving me a look of deep concern. But do you feel heard, Saul? I told her I feel heard when my code gets merged and the system works. This was clearly the wrong answer. The smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened. She scribbled something on her notepad. I'd bet my entire salary it was problem. Soon after, the real changes began. First came the meetings. So many meetings. We now had a mandatory morning circle of trust. Every day, for 30 minutes, we had to go around and share our emotional state and one personal victory from the previous day. Most of the old guard guys just mumbled something like, "I'm fine, I fixed a bug." My contribution was usually, "Tired? Need coffee? Let's get to work." Amalia would always gently correct me. "Saul, this is a safe space. The work will be there. We need to connect as humans first." My desire to connect as a human was directly proportional to the number of open tickets in the system. Productivity started to dip. What used to be a quick chat at a desk to solve a problem now required scheduling a 45-minute meeting with a formal agenda. But Amalia's reports to the owner were glowing. She wasn't measuring lines of code or uptime. She was measuring team engagement. She sent out surveys about workplace satisfaction. Of course, satisfaction was up. We were barely working. The real test came a few weeks later. We had a major project on the roadmap, a complete overhaul of our database interaction layer, a delicate, complex surgery on the heart of the engine. I had spent the better part of a month mapping it out, a careful, phased approach that would minimize downtime and risk. I presented my plan to Amalia. She listened patiently, nodding. When I was done, she smiled. "This is great work, Saul. Very thorough, but it feels very top-down." I had no idea what that meant. "I want this to be a democratic process," she continued. "I don't believe in the lone genius model. The best ideas come from the collective." And so she created the Architectural Committee. The purpose of this committee was to review and approve all major technical decisions. The members, the entire development team, from me, with 15 years of experience, down to the intern we hired a month ago who was still trying to figure out how Git works. Every member had an equal vote. My heart sank into my stomach. I knew it was over. The first committee meeting was a nightmare. I presented my database overhaul plan again, this time to the entire room. I explained the reasoning, the risks, the specific technical choices based on years of dealing with the engine's quirks. When I finished, Amalia opened the floor for discussion. One of the junior developers, a kid fresh out of college, raised his hand. He said he'd just read a blog post about a brand new, experimental database technology. Let's call it Hyperbase. He argued that my plan was unimaginative and that we should be bold and rewrite the entire thing using Hyperbase. I calmly explained that Hyperbase was not production-ready, had no long-term support, and was completely unsuited for our specific use case. I listed about 10 technical reasons why it was a suicidal idea. Amalia beamed at the junior dev. "Thank you for that," she said. "This is exactly what I was hoping for, challenging the status quo, thinking outside the box. Saul, I feel your response was a bit dismissive. We need to encourage this kind of brave thinking, not shut it down." I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. I tried to argue, bringing up facts, data, benchmarks. But I wasn't arguing about technology anymore. I was arguing against a feeling. The discussion devolved. People who had never even worked on the database layer were now passionately debating its future, based on half-remembered articles and conference talks. In the end, it went to a vote. My carefully constructed, safe, and logical plan was voted down. The winning proposal? A compromise to create a research spike to investigate using Hyperbase for a small part of the system. It was the stupidest possible outcome. It combined the risk of new tech with the complexity of integrating it into an old system, guaranteeing failure. The project, which should have taken 2 months, was now indefinitely stalled while a team of inexperienced developers tried to staple a rocket engine to a horse-drawn carriage. Amalia declared the meeting a resounding success for collaboration. I went back to my desk and stared at my monitor for an hour, doing nothing. This became the new normal. Every decision, no matter how small, was put through the grinder of the committee. My role shifted from architect to full-time debater. I had to write multi-page documents to justify changing a single line of code because someone might feel it was the wrong approach. My pull request comments were scrutinized not for their technical accuracy, but for their tone. I once left a comment saying, "This implementation is inefficient and will not scale. Please use the established caching pattern here." I was pulled into a private meeting with Amalia. She told me my comment was aggressive and created a hostile environment. She suggested a better way to phrase it would be, "Thank you for your contribution. I'm wondering if we might explore some alternative patterns here to enhance performance. I'd love to collaborate with you on that." I was being asked to sugarcoat facts to the point of incomprehensibility. The old guard developers saw what was happening. They retreated into a shell. They'd just do their assigned tickets, keep their heads down, and say yes in the meetings. There was no point in fighting. The passion was gone. The place felt like a morgue with better lighting. We weren't a team of engineers anymore. We were a support group that occasionally wrote some code. The quality of the product began to suffer. Small bugs started creeping in. Performance degraded slowly, almost imperceptibly. The research spike for Hyperbase had predictably gone nowhere, wasting 6 weeks of development time. When I brought up the slipping deadlines and rising bug count to Amalia, she had a ready-made explanation. "This is expected, Saul. We are paying down the emotional debt of the previous toxic, high-pressure culture. We are healing. Once the team feels truly safe, productivity will skyrocket." It was like she was in a cult, and the cult was her own LinkedIn feed. I started to feel a profound sense of exhaustion. It wasn't the work. The work was easy. It was the fight. The constant draining battle against incompetence disguised as empathy. The breaking point wasn't a big explosion. It was a small, quiet moment. I was in another committee meeting. We were debating the color of a button for 3 hours. 3 hours. The original ticket was a 5-minute CSS change, but the discussion had spiraled. We were talking about the emotional impact of the color blue, the accessibility implications of a certain shade of gray, the patriarchal connotations of sharp corners versus rounded corners. I just sat there, and I felt nothing. The frustration was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a deep, hollow emptiness. I realized I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if they painted the button rainbow-colored and made it scream when you clicked it. My job was no longer to build things. It was to manage feelings. And I was a terrible feelings manager. That night, I went home, updated my resume, and quietly put my status on LinkedIn to open to work. My inbox exploded. Recruiters from actual tech companies, companies that build things, were all over me. It was a strange feeling. In Amalia's world, I was a dinosaur, a relic of a toxic past. But out here in the real world, my skills were in high demand. I went through a few interviews. It felt amazing. They asked me hard, technical questions. They wanted to see my work. They cared about what I could build, not how I felt about the color blue. I got 3 offers in a week. One of them was from a company I deeply respected. More money, more responsibility, and a role as a lead architect on a genuinely interesting project. I accepted it without hesitation. The next morning, I walked into work and typed up my 2-week notice. It was short, professional, and devoid of any emotion. I handed it to Amalia. She read it, and for the first time, her corporate smile faltered, just for a second. Then it was back in place. "Oh, Saul," she said, with a tone of rehearsed sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that. I had a feeling you weren't fully on board with the new direction. This is probably for the best." There was no counteroffer, no attempt to ask why, just a condescending implication that I was the one who couldn't adapt, that I was the problem. "I wish you the best of luck finding a culture that's a better fit for you," she said. I just nodded. "You too." My final 2 weeks were a blur of documentation. I was a professional. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. I loved the engine, even if I hated what the place had become. I wrote hundreds of pages of documentation. I detailed every quirk, every hidden dependency, every dark corner of the system I had kept in my head for years. I held handover meetings. I tried to explain the architecture to the remaining developers. They just stared at me with dead eyes. They knew they were screwed. Amalia, of course, had already planned my replacement, or rather, replacements. She told the team that my departure was a fantastic opportunity to decentralize knowledge and empower new voices. She wasn't going to hire one architect. She was hiring 2 senior collaborative developers. Their names were Lena and Ellis. They were brought in to interview during my last week. I was not invited to be part of the interview process, naturally, but I saw them in the hallway. They looked exactly like you'd expect. The same energy as Amalia. They talked a lot about their experience in agile transformation and building inclusive digital spaces. I heard from one of the old guard guys that in their technical interview, they spend most of the time criticizing the legacy nature of our codebase without offering any concrete solutions. Amalia hired them on the spot. On my last day, a few of the old guard developers took me out for a quiet lunch. They didn't say much. They just shook their heads. "You're getting out at the right time," one of them said, staring into his beer. "It's over, man," said another. "She's building her own little kingdom." They knew it. I knew it. But there was nothing to be done. When I got back to the office, I packed my small box of things. My keyboard, a couple of books, a coffee mug. Amalia walked by as I was heading for the door. "Good luck, Saul," she chirped, as if I were heading off on vacation. I didn't look back. I walked out of that building and took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like I had been holding my breath for months. A huge weight lifted from my shoulders. It was the feeling of freedom. Freedom from the meetings. Freedom from the committees. Freedom from the endless, circular, pointless talk. I started my new job a week later. It was everything I had hoped for. Smart people, hard problems, and a culture of getting things done. I was happy. I mostly forgot about the old place. It was like a bad dream. But about a month later, I got a text from one of the old guard guys who still worked there. It was a screenshot of an internal company announcement. It was from Amalia. She was proudly announcing their first major project since my departure. A full-scale refactoring of the engine, the announcement read, to modernize the codebase, eliminate technical debt, and align it with our new collaborative values. I stared at the text. They were going to rewrite the engine. Lena and Ellis, the 2 new hires who thought CSS button colors had patriarchal undertones, were going to perform open-heart surgery on a system they didn't understand. I put my phone down, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. I knew exactly how this story was going to end. Be me, again. Happily employed at new job. The work is challenging. The people are competent, and meetings are only scheduled when absolutely necessary. It's paradise. I'm so absorbed in my new project that I barely think about the old company. But every now and then, I'd get a message from Dave, one of the old guard guys who was still trapped there. These messages were like dispatches from a failing state. It started with the refactoring project. Dave told me Lena and Ellis kicked it off with a company-wide presentation. They presented a roadmap full of colorful charts and inspiring quotes. Their primary goal, they said, was not performance or stability. It was code readability and inclusivity. Their first major action was to implement a new set of ethical coding standards. This included a linter that would automatically reject any code containing problematic words. Master and slave for databases were obviously out, replaced with primary and replica. Fine, whatever. Industry is moving that way anyway. But it didn't stop there. The word execute was flagged. It was deemed too violent. It had to be replaced with perform. Any function named sanity check was renamed to coherence validation. They spent 2 full weeks, a team of 10 developers, just renaming variables and functions across millions of lines of code to comply with their new Bible of acceptable terms. MFW, an entire sprint, is dedicated to a glorified find and replace because the word execute might hurt a server's feelings. Dave said the old guard just did it. It was easier than arguing, but this was just the warm-up act. The real fun began when Lena and Ellis started improving my core algorithms. The engine had a highly optimized scheduling system. It was the secret sauce of the whole platform. It was complex, multi-threaded, and very, very fast. It looked intimidating if you didn't understand the math behind it. Ellis declared it unreadable and a monument to solitary, non-collaborative design. She decided to replace it with a much simpler, more democratic algorithm she'd learned in a coding boot camp. It was the programming equivalent of replacing a V8 engine with a hamster on a wheel. The old guard developers tried to warn her. They showed her benchmarks. They drew diagrams on whiteboards. They explained that the existing system was complex for a reason. She listened with a patient smile and then told them that an over-reliance on benchmarks was a form of cognitive bias and that simplicity and clarity are their own form of performance. They pushed the new hamster wheel algorithm to production. The effects were immediate. System-wide performance dropped by 40%. Reports that used to take seconds now took minutes. The user interface felt sluggish and unresponsive. When clients started complaining, Amalia went into full spin mode. She sent out a company-wide email. She didn't call it a performance degradation. She called it an intentional calibration of user experience. She wrote, and I quote from Dave's screenshot, "We are encouraging our users to adopt a more mindful and deliberate pace in their workflow." They were literally telling their customers that the software was slow on purpose for their own good. Topkek. The bugs started next. Not just simple bugs, but deep architectural ones. The problem with rewriting something you don't understand is that you don't know what you don't know. My old code had a lot of what looked like redundant checks and weird edge case handling. Lena and Ellis saw this as code bloat and defensive programming, which they considered a sign of a low-trust environment. They started simplifying the code, removing the checks, taking out the redundancies, and that's when the data corruption started. It was subtle at first. A customer's order would be duplicated, an invoice would be assigned to the wrong account. These were bugs as ghosts. They were rare, and the new team couldn't replicate them. When a user reported one, the official response from Lena and Ellis was usually user error or cannot reproduce. Amalia backed them up completely. She held a meeting where she explained that the vast majority of bug reports were actually a form of user resistance to change. The old guard knew what was happening. They could see the patterns. The bugs were happening in the exact modules that Lena and Ellis had simplified, but when they tried to raise the alarm, they were shut down. Amalia accused them of sabotage and failing to embrace the new culture. One of the best senior guys, a man named Mike, who had been with the company for 12 years, cornered Amalia in the hallway and showed her definitive proof on his laptop of how the new code was corrupting the database. The next day, Mike was fired. The official reason was creating a toxic and adversarial work environment. The message was clear. Find a problem, and you are the problem. After Mike was fired, the rest of the old guard went completely silent. Dave's text to me became more desperate. He said the atmosphere was like a nightmare. Everyone lived in fear. The developers would just sit at their desks, wearing noise-canceling headphones, trying to look busy. Lena and Ellis were the new queens. They would spend most of their days in meetings, talking about future-proofing our paradigms and ideation sessions for a more empathetic user interface. They weren't fixing the growing mountain of bugs. They were designing new features for a platform that was actively crumbling beneath their feet. The system was now a Jenga tower with half the blocks pulled out. It was still standing, but barely. And then came the news of the big one, the Genesis project. It was a massive new integration with a Fortune 500 client, the biggest deal in the company's history. The deal had been signed a year ago, long before Amalia's reign. The technical requirements were huge. It required a new set of high-performance APIs, real-time data synchronization, and 99.9999% uptime. Basically, it required the old engine, the powerful, reliable one, not the new, mindful version. The deadline was set in stone. The launch was in 2 months. Dave told me the remaining old guard developers were in a state of quiet panic. They knew the current system couldn't handle it, not even for a second. They tried to tell Amalia. They warned her that going live would be a catastrophe. She dismissed their concerns as fear-mongering and an inability to adapt to an agile workflow. Her big solution? More meetings. She started Genesis Project Harmony sessions, where the team could share their anxieties about the launch. The problem wasn't their anxiety. The problem was that the code was fundamentally, catastrophically broken. Lena and Ellis, meanwhile, were supremely confident. They insisted that the final pieces of their refactoring would solve all the performance issues just in time. Their plan was to replace the final core module of my original architecture, the user authentication system, a week before the launch. This is the equivalent of changing the foundation of a skyscraper while people are still living in it. The old guard begged them not to. The existing authentication system was old, but it was battle-tested and secure. It had never failed. Lena and Ellis said it was over-engineered and not user-centric. They rewrote it from scratch in a week. I got a text from Dave the night before the launch. They're actually doing it. They just merged the new auth code. Pray for us. I didn't pray. I just made some popcorn. The next day was launch day. The owner of the company was there. A whole team from the new client was there. They had champagne on ice, ready to celebrate the multi-million-dollar deal. The whole office gathered around the main conference room, where a giant monitor showed the system status. Amalia stood at the front, glowing. She gave a speech about the incredible journey they had been on, how they had overcome cultural hurdles, and built a team based on trust and empathy. She gave a special shout-out to Lena and Ellis for their visionary leadership. Then, with a theatrical flourish, she looked at Ellis and said, "Do it." Ellis, sitting at a laptop connected to the big screen, typed a command and hit enter. The deployment script started running. For a moment, everything looked fine. Green check marks appeared on the screen. Then the screen turned red. A single critical error message appeared. Fatal, database connection pool, exhausted. Before anyone could even process what that meant, a cascade of other errors flooded the screen. API gateway unresponsive. 503 service unavailable. Null pointer. Exception in core services. The entire system status dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. On the other side of the room, someone gasped. They had the public website open on their laptop. It was showing a default server error page. It was down, all of it. The main platform, the customer portals, the internal admin tools, everything. The system wasn't just broken. It had been erased from existence. A dead silence fell over the room. The faces of the client team went from celebratory to stone-cold fury. The owner looked like he had seen a ghost. Amalia's smile was frozen on her face, a grotesque mask of denial. Lena and Ellis were frantically typing, their faces pale. They looked like children who had just broken their mother's favorite vase. It's just a temporary glitch," Amalia stammered, her voice an octave too high. "The system is just recalibrating." The owner turned to face her. I've never seen a man look so calm, and yet so utterly terrifying. He didn't shout. He spoke in a low, deadly voice. "Fix it." Lena and Ellis couldn't fix it. They had no idea what was wrong. Their new, simplified authentication code had created an infinite loop of connection requests that had instantly overwhelmed and crashed the entire database cluster. And because every single service depended on the database, the entire platform had imploded. They were trying to restart the servers, but the system would just crash again instantly. They were completely out of their depth. Amalia kept walking behind them, whispering useless corporate slogans like, "Let's think outside the box," and "What are our actionable next steps?" After 10 minutes of this agonizing failure theater, Amalia did the one thing she knew how to do. She found someone else to blame. She turned to the owner, her face a mask of grave concern. "This is sabotage," she said, her voice filled with fake emotion. "The system is fighting back. This is Saul's legacy code. It's so convoluted and toxic, it must have had some kind of hidden time bomb in it." She was actually trying to pin the whole thing on me. And for a second, it looked like the owner, who knew nothing about tech, might actually buy it. And that's when Dave stood up. Quiet, unassuming Dave, who had been sitting in the back of the room the whole time. He walked to the front, took the keyboard from a stunned Ellis, and plugged his own laptop into the main screen. He didn't say a word. He just opened up the version control system. He brought up the history for the authentication module. And there it was, for everyone to see. A log of every change, every line of code, time-stamped and with the author's name next to it. The screen showed my last commit to that file, dated over 3 months ago, followed by a long list of commits from Lena and Ellis over the past week, culminating in a massive 5,000-line change that was committed the night before. Dave clicked on that final commit. He brought up a diff, a side-by-side comparison. On the left was my old stable working code. On the right was their new, broken, simplified garbage. He pointed to one specific block of code on the right. "There," Dave said, his voice clear and steady. "That's the infinite loop. This has nothing to do with Saul's code. This was committed yesterday at 10:32 p.m. by Ellis." The evidence was absolute, undeniable. You can't argue with Git blame. It's the ultimate source of truth. The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Amalia looked at the screen, then at Dave, then at the owner. The blood drained from her face. Her entire narrative, her entire kingdom built on buzzwords and blame, had been demolished by a single, factual screen of information. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The owner stared at the screen for a long, long time. Then he looked at Amalia, Lena, and Ellis. He pointed a shaking finger toward the door. "Get out," he whispered. They just stood there, frozen. "Get out," he roared, his voice echoing through the silent office. "Pack your things and get out of my building. You are all fired." The aftermath was brutal. Dave told me the company had to issue a public apology and pay a massive penalty to the client for breaking the contract. They hired an expensive team of outside consultants to come in and fix the mess. Their first recommendation? Roll back the entire codebase to the last stable version, my version. It took them 3 months and cost the company over $1 million just to get back to the state they were in the day I left. I get texts from Dave sometimes. He got a huge promotion and is now leading the effort to rebuild the team. He's only hiring people who can actually code. Lena and Ellis, according to their LinkedIn profiles, are now freelance diversity and inclusion consultants. And Amalia? She started a blog. She writes long, angry articles about the inherent sexism of the tech industry and how her visionary leadership was crushed by the patriarchal resistance to change. She paints herself as a martyr, a victim. Sometimes I read her posts and I just laugh because I know the truth. I saw it happen. She wasn't a victim. She was a hurricane of incompetence in a pantsuit. As for me, I'm still at my new job. I got a promotion too. I'm leading a team building something new and exciting. My work is respected. My skills are valued. My reality is based on logic, not feelings. It turns out that in the end, the real world doesn't care about your ideology. It doesn't care about your buzzwords or your safe spaces. It just cares about one thing. Does the engine work? And mine always did.